Okay, started the live. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. We will be starting soon. We are just waiting for Abbas Tyrewala to join.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Abbas sir is here. Rishika.
Yes, promoted him to the panelist.
Okay. Okay. So we'll start. Okay. So good morning, everyone. My name is Atul. So we'll be having a great webinar by Mr. Abbas Tyrewala. I mean, there's no formal introduction required as such. As you can see, he's worked on a lot of films as a screenwriter, dialogue writer, script writer, and also directed Janatiya Janana and Chutai Sari. Also, and got a lot of awards for his work. I welcome Abbas sir. Hello, Abbas sir. Abbas sir, can you hear me? I guess there's some technical issue with the. Guys, we'll wait for a couple of minutes. I think there is some technical issue from Abbas sir's side. We also faced some problem while logging in. So we'll just wait for a couple of minutes. We'll try to figure it out and then we'll start. Abbas sir, you're here, right?
Okay, am I online? Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Finally. Sorry, I don't know why it was giving some serious issue for the last 20 minutes.
No worries, sir. Thank you for
apologies for making people wait. I'm not very good with the computer except for using Final Draft and Word, so I always struggle with everything technical.
Okay, no worries, sir. Okay, good morning, sir.
Good morning.
I'll again give a formal introduction. As you can see, Abbas.
Can you, in your formal introduction, please mention the fact that my filmography does not involve Lagan? I would really appreciate that.
Thank you. Okay. Sorry. I just referred Wikipedia. That's why
I know Wikipedia is not always right first lesson for people doing research for scripts.
Okay. Sorry for that. So let's just not include, guys, the Lagan. But yeah, Maqbool, everyone knows. And sorry, just.
Don't worry about it. Just kidding.
Yeah. So good morning, sir. Welcome for your webinar. So starting with the webinar, can you just quickly tell your experience and how's your journey into this, especially Bollywood industry?
I will do that. I just need to caution everyone who has been kind enough to join that there might be certain disturbances in the sound, in the cat sounds that you will hear in the background. That's my cats who insist on talking to me. They don't understand that sometimes I need to be left alone, and they've just woken up, so there might be some conversation. Keep quiet, Olive. Okay. Also, could I request a couple of you to please keep your screens on, so I'm not talking to just a blank screen and a small icon. I'd really appreciate that.
Sure.
Hello, people.
Hello. So, Abbas sir, this is Rito here.
Hi, Rita. How are you doing?
Yeah, it's good. And this is Rishika.
So, I am Rishika.
These are filmmaking faculties and will be moderating with us.
Wonderful. Okay, so I just think that talking for too long to a screen is not my idea of how this time should be spent. I think people are starved for conversation more than listening to monologue. So I will just touch upon one topic that I think would kind of contextualize something that is not discussed too often by writers in India. And we shall use that to jump into a more interactive form, if that is all right with you. Okay. I don't think there's anything more boring than listening to a screen ramble on and on. So I don't want to do too much of that. Okay.
Okay.
But the topic that I do want to touch upon today uh, comes from a very strange characteristic that Indian movies have, especially Bollywood in particular, um, over other world cinema. Okay. If you went on to IMDb and searched, uh, the pages of films that you like from different countries, you would be very hard pressed to encounter a credit like dialogue or dialogue writer. The concept does not exist almost anywhere else except India, right? Um, and there is a reason for that. In any other form of writing, the idea that you as the writer are not the person who knows what your character is saying or should be saying uh, is ludicrous. Most of the good books on writing that you will read, especially about literature, films are a slightly different medium, and I will address that, will tell you that a writer's job is not to decide what a character says. A writer's job is to, once he has created the characters, once she has created the characters, is to listen to what they are saying and try and capture that as authentically as possible. Because, because all forms of storytelling, we are dealing with fiction here, are nothing if not an investment into the emotional journey of its characters, whether protagonists or antagonists. If you don't care about their journeys, you cannot care about the story. If you do not care about the people, you cannot care about their journeys. If you do not believe in the people, you cannot care about the people. So the moment you do anything that is false from the point of view of a character's behavior, you lose your audience. Therefore, above all, a writer has to know how to translate their character in terms of what they are saying, feeling, and behaving. The idea that a writer might not actually know what the character is going to say in that moment, and that is left to an entirely third person who has not necessarily created those characters, is an extremely, extremely strange concept, very peculiar to our form. And there is a reason for that. To some extent, it is historical. In that, when cinema was first, launched upon the world, there was a certain technical investment in the craft. It was not where somebody could sit down with a parchment and a piece of paper and start writing. So you could have the poorest among you, as far as they could afford a piece of paper and something to write with, they could be a writer. If they could afford a blank canvas and some colors, and in some cases they improvised those colors, created their own dyes and paints, you could have a great painter. In cinema, necessarily you needed a certain amount of technical investment, and therefore by definition you had people who were well off, who were first exposed to this craft, and who had a certain amount of foreign travel or exposure to foreign concepts and foreign technologies, and had an awareness of uh, these movements in the world, who were the first people to get fascinated by it. And they were very often educated abroad, educated at the best schools and colleges, and primarily there seemed to be there would be an English bent to their education. And initially, that didn't seem to have a problem, because cinema did not have talkies. You did not have sound. You did not have sound. It is when, and these were the people who developed the language for cinema. It is when talkies came in, and they realized that India, unlike a lot of other countries, does not speak one language. It speaks many languages. All right. So until now, a man, over here I can say man and don't need to say he stroke she, because primarily in the early days the filmmakers tended to be men, so it's not a sexist slip up. So in those days, a man sitting in Bengal could easily make a film that people in Tamil Nadu could watch or Meghalaya could watch, and it didn't matter, right? But suddenly there was language, and the people making the films did not necessarily speak the same language that the audience that they were making these films for spoke. As the audience base broadened and more people needed to be reached to justify the technical investments, they realized that if you wanted to speak to people, you had to speak their language, and the people with the knowledge about cinema and the means to invest in the medium weren't necessarily qualified to do so. And this is why the whole concept of dialogue writing came in, right? Separate person, just excuse me 1 second. Shanti, darwaza band kar lo, please. All right, so somebody who was qualified with the writing and sort of could enhance with a certain degree of drama and hyperbole the characters that had been designed, they would then put down the dialogue. Now, as the Hindi film medium grew more and more, there was even a further separation because Hindi itself is not one dialect, right? And there's so many dialects in Hindi that in a lot of cases the way Hindi is spoken in a part of Maharashtra would not be understood in certain parts of Bihar, and sort of vice versa. And some version that was part Hindi and part the local dialect would you had Bhojpuri, which you can kind of understand but not really get get it totally. Gujarat would have its own version, Rajasthan would have its own versions, and therefore uh, the language of Hindustani uh, became more and more designed and more um, engineered to reach out to as many people as possible where it could make itself understood. And Bollywood therefore developed almost its own idiom, almost its own language for dialogue writing that supposedly reached every person who spoke some degree of Hindi without disorienting them. The problem is that the more you cater the language to be understood by a lot of people, the less and less it sounded like a language actually spoken anywhere by anyone in India. And as a result, what you had was a language that was now spoken only in cinema. And you developed a certain breed of dialogue writers who could write those characters and those dialogues in a way that was exciting, was fun to hear, and was often bombastic and often geared towards getting the maximum possible impact, and had to be sort of simple and often loud and hyperbolic and dramatic so that people who did not get the finer points of language would still be able to enjoy it. As this language developed, the expertise developed, more and more Hindi film in particular, the characters stopped really sounding like real people. And there is a reason why, if you look at regional cinema, good regional cinema, I'm sure regional cinema has its own material designed purely for entertainment's sake, where the characters don't sound like or look like anyone. I remember as a child, I watched a lot of Marathi cinema that at that time, a big part of the staple diet was these comedies with Lakshmikant Bede and Ashok Saraf. And that was as bad as any Bollywood film. And I have as much love and affection for those memories from my childhood as any film of Amitabh Bachchan. But the fact of the matter is that this is not how people talk. This is not so. The way you can sink your teeth into a really good Malayalam, Tamil, Bengali, various cinemas where the people writing the stories know their people, know the language they speak, have an expertise with it, and are able to communicate it. Okay. And therefore, those characters are ringing true. They're leaping off the screen, and very often, like in the case of Ritvik Ghatak or Satyajit Ray's cinema and a lot of other very potent films that we have seen over the years, the characters stay alive with you as people for ages. And you can't even remember that it's just a story, it's just a fiction. When I think about Meghe Dhaka Tara, and that character's journey and her anguish at the end, uh, all these years, almost 25 years after seeing it, I am still affected by the memory of how much of that character suffered. And that is because that character truly became a person to me. And that is above all the journey. How do you communicate? How do you go on such a journey if your characters are not speaking like any person. This brings us to how do I know that the lady in Mege Dhaka Tara, the lead character, was actually sounding like a real person? Because I don't speak Bengali, I've never lived in Bengal. So why is it that at times the story of a tribal mother suffering to feed her malnutrition child in a small part of Africa seems more real to us than the story of a young person in urban India in a university doing a script writing webinar? I mean, if somebody made a story about that, I assure you that that would seem much more false to you than a lot of cinema that has nothing to do with your life. Why is that? That is quite simply because somewhere within us, I believe that just as we have a genetic memory, just as we have a biological memory, just as we have a cultural memory, we also have an emotional memory as human beings. Okay? And these are a priori memories. They are there even before we have had experiences to justify them. There is a reason why human beings often have dreams of falling down, even though falling down and dying is never really one of the greatest dangers that a child faces, right? It is part of your memory from the time when you were an ape and you were sleeping in trees, and the biggest danger to you was losing your grip in your sleep and falling down and dying. And that memory endures within us. Similarly, there is an emotional memory. And I believe that somewhere along the way, all of us have had so many lives and journeys distilled into who we have finally become, that when a character hits a really true chord, when the character finds something really honest, when a moment is really true, uh, the emotional reaction that a person would have to that kind of a situation, we instinctively know whether or not it is true. I may be a 45-year-old man with absolutely nothing resembling a vagina, with absolutely nothing resembling a child coming out of my womb, with absolutely nothing like, the starvation that, knowing nothing of the starvation that would characterize that mother in Africa, and don't know the language, but in a well-constructed moment of writing, when I see a situation, I don't need to have given birth to a child to know the pain that a mother goes through when her child is hungry. And that, above all, is what and why great story writing has flourished. Because otherwise, every time you did not recognize the lives of characters, you would switch off because they would not ring true. But some of the best books you have read, in fact, most of the best books you have read, have nothing to do with your life. And that is because of the emotional consciousness and the emotional memory that we as a species have. We are able to recreate those situations, okay, and feel completely as if we know exactly the pain that character is going through, the reaction that they have, and the course of action that they choose from then on. And when that is not written well, or it is written falsely, you say, that's not true. That moment is false. I don't think that works. That's not what I would do. That's not what the character would do. How do you know? You've not lived that life. You know because you know, and each one of us has lived a lot of those lives, and that has made it possible for people to know how people would behave, react, and talk in a particular kind of situation. Now, if people are so clued in to how people behave and talk and react, then how does a scriptwriter whose primary job is manipulation, his primary job is to get people to feel a particular way about their characters? If a scriptwriter decides that she wants people to like a particular character, she has to manipulate them into liking that character, because otherwise the story won't work. If people start liking the protagonist and don't like start liking the antagonist and don't like the protagonist, or start supporting the antagonist journey, quite simply, if the audience starts liking Captain, whatever his name was in Lagan, that movie that I didn't write, if they like him more than they like Bhuvan, then you have a slight problem. So you have to manipulate people into liking characters that you want them to like, supporting the journey of characters you want them to support, disliking the characters you want them to dislike, and you have to do this without telling them. You have to get them to feel this. And now we are saying that, hold on a second, people can tell when characters are behaving appropriately or not appropriately, falsely or not falsely. So then how do I go on this journey without using? So what most people end up doing is using false dialogue. Okay, false dialogue, and more dangerously, and that is the monster. This is something I could talk about at length, but I really want this to turn interactive very soon. So therefore, I want to come quickly upon the main topic I wanted to address, which is false dialogue, and even more dangerously, informative dialogue. Informative dialogue is dialogue that exists purely for the purpose of communicating something that the writer feels is necessary for the audience to know, and has no other way of communicating it to her audience, and therefore will write dialogue that actually the characters would not speak. Okay, so very often you will have people saying things कि वो बहुत गुस्से वाला है, वो बहुत गुस्से वाली है, उसने उसके पति को छोड़ दिया था. Pure information lines, and informative dialogue. There's a very simple test to see what is informative dialogue and what is dramatic dialogue. If you take out that line, if you take out that dialogue from the movie, does anything happen except the absence of that information? Does the story stop? Not the understanding of the story, not the availability of the information, the dramatic flow of the story. Is it in any way affected or not? Does anything else change except for the fact that the audience gets that information through that character? Right? If nothing else is being done by that line, if it is not taking the story forward, number one, most importantly, if it is not taking the story forward, if it is not generating an emotional response, if it is not at least getting a good laugh, and all it is doing is just communicating information that the writer feels it is important for her audience to have, then that is the soul of bad dialogue writing. The cousin to this monster is the voiceover. Okay, voiceover used judiciously is an absolutely wonderful cinematic tool, but to use it blindly without using cinema, without using the juxtaposition and superimposition of dramatic scenes and moments so that the audience is able to enjoy what you're talking about. If you're just going to have a voice drone on and tell you what is going on screen, what is going on in the lives of the characters, then basically what you're saying is, I'm doing a radio play, and what I am shooting with the camera is just an illustration. So instead of your imagination, I'm giving you the faces that are going to carry out the story, but the characters are not doing anything that's going to communicate to you. I will communicate to you just as I would in a book or a radio play. That is the biggest insult to the medium, because the cinematic medium is above all about not doing that. Okay, let me give you an example. The worst way to find out that a character is angry is for that character to say, I am angry. That is the worst form of writing. Okay, there's something I learned very early on from one of my two teachers in life. This is Mr. Shivam Nair, who actually currently has co-directed a show called Special Ops on OTT. Okay, so he was one of my earliest teachers, and he said the worst way to find out that a character is angry is for that character to say, "I'm angry." The second worst way to find out that that character is angry, okay, is for somebody else to say that character is angry. The third way is the character behaving in an angry way, shouting, screaming, something like that. A fourth way, and that's where it starts getting a bit sophisticated, okay, is because the audience looks at him and says, he's angry, because clearly he's behaving angry. He's just not saying he's angry. Now, if you want to understand cinema, come to a slightly more subtle way of doing something where if you have the man talking with certain difficulty, but with a certain patience with another character towards whom he or she is supposed to be angry, not seemingly angry, not seemingly enraged, and then you cut, and the moment you say cut, you're now talking cinema, and then you cut to a shot from behind him, and you see that he is gripping his knuckles or something within his hands so tightly that his fingers have gone white, or maybe he even cuts himself on something that he's holding and there's a little blood. while on the time he is seemingly trying to smile and have a conversation. And now what happens? Nobody on screen seems angry. Nobody is saying I'm angry. Nobody is saying that person is angry. But that realization that that character is so angry occurs in the only place where cinematic realizations should occur, in the mind of the audience. When the audience says, without anybody saying on screen, oh, guy, man, that guy is so angry, that is cinema. Okay? So, saying it on screen, bad writing. Saying it through characters, bad dialogue writing. Constructing your scenes in a way where you say it in the mind of the audience is cinema. Your journey as scriptwriters or as filmmakers is how many realizations, how many emotional um, deductions can you get the audience to make because they get invested in your story, care about your characters, and make for your characters, realize about your characters without you having to say it. Because the more you take the audience on this journey of realizing something about the characters that you have not said, those characters are now becoming etched in the minds of the audience. You are giving them a fulfillment that comes from the process of discovery. It's almost like a treasure hunt. Oh, I know something about that character that nobody has told me, right? And that is the journey. If you can take the audience on, it is a journey of immense fulfillment, and that is the best use of the medium of cinema. So cinema, please remember, is not an audio play. It's not a dialogue play. There are certain tools at your disposal. Use them. Use visuality, use audio. I'm not saying dialogue. Use audio, use sounds, use cuts, use the superimposition of images and situations and drama to get the audience to say the things about the characters that you want them to know and feel, rather than having to tell them on screen. Avoid doing it through bad dialogue where the character would not speak that way. And if you have to give information through dialogue, there is a way to do it, which is create a situation. And that's not, again, not great cinema, but still, most of us are, sadly, including me, not out to do great cinema all the time. Some of us want to tell stories that will work with a large percentage of the audience. Some of us want to do commercial films, want to do films that a large number of people will pay to watch. Not everyone is trying to create, memorable cinema that they're happy if fewer people watch, but it communicates the truth of their art. For a lot of people, cinema is not art. I don't believe cinema is art. It can rise to the level of art, but above all, it is a craft. That does not mean that at its heights, craftsmanship cannot be art, but above all, cinema is not art. It is a craft. Okay. And it has no existence, I believe, without its audience. The audience is as integral a part of the process of cinema, because cinema is designed to generate certain realizations in the mind of the viewer. Then without a viewer, those realizations are not being generated. It cannot be complete without that process, and without that chain being complete, without that relationship being fulfilled. Okay. But if you have to, so when you have to communicate through dialogue and you don't have the luxury of great cinema, or more importantly, you do not, you have the demands of an OTT platform telling you, no, this is too slow. People need to get hooked onto the story. People need to get caught up in the action. People need to know all this so that they can be involved in the lives of characters. Watch some great shows and movies, and you'll realize that one way of doing it is just create the right superimposition of a moment, and you will be able to write the kind of dialogue where so much information can be captured. Like just yesterday when I was speaking to Atul, I referred to a scene that for some bizarre reason, I just started watching Game of Thrones again, just to see how it was done. And there's one particular scene that struck me as very, very clever writing. There's a scene, do we have that clip by any chance? I requested that as a screen grab. Is it available to us?
Yes. I have the entire episode, but I can play the scene.
Okay, so what I'm going to request now is for all of you to bear with me for about 4 minutes. I think that scene might be, I'm not very sure. But this is where we do not know, this is very early on in the first episode of season 1 of Game of Thrones, where we do not know anything about the Lannisters. We do not know the concept of the King's Hand. what it is. We can guess, but we don't know anything about it. We don't know who the Lannisters are. We don't know who is the king. We don't know what the relationship between the houses are. And we don't know anything about the two characters that we are going to see for the first time and are going to play a very important role. Look at the way the scene has been constructed for a certain dialogue to occur, and just take a moment after that and just say, okay, how much information did I get within those 2 minutes of or 1 minute of dialogue exchange between two people, that when the scene started, I did not even know their brother and sister. So this is clever dialogue writing. I will not call this high art by any chance, but it's just an example of, if you construct the scene right in a particular way, you are able to give a lot of information through lines that don't sound too false. There is one false line, and I will ask some of you about what you think I'm referring to. But can we play that scene, please?
Sure.
For our audience.
As your brother, I feel it's my duty to warn you. You worry too much. It's starting to show.
And you never worry about anything. When we were 7, you jumped off the cliffs at Castle Rock. 100-foot drop into the water. You were never afraid.
There was nothing to be afraid of until you told Father. Lannisters don't act like fools.
What if John Arryn told someone?
But who would you tell?
My husband?
If you told the king, both our heads would be skewered in the city gates by now. Whatever John Arryn knew or didn't know, it died with him. And Robert will choose a new hand of the king, someone to do his job while he's off fucking balls and hunting whores. Or is it the other way around? And life will go on.
You should be the hand of the king.
That's a none I can do without. Their days are too long, their lives are too short.
So I'm guessing that I don't need to explain that too much. Within a few lines of dialogue, you know the concept of the hand of the king. You know that these are brother and sister. You know the name of the man who died. You know he was the hand of the king. You know he knew something about this brother and sister, which he could not reveal to whom? The king, who's the husband of the sister. Neither of them have too much regard for him. They are afraid of their father in spite of the fact that there's a certain recklessness and foolhardiness to the brother. And you're introduced to the fact that the life of the hand of the king is very short and often dangerous, which is a preparation for the next scene, which is when a man that we like, Ned Stark, is going to be offered that position. And so we will understand why he's reluctant, or why his family is reluctant, why his wife is reluctant for him to take that position. If you have noticed the scene, of course, there were two false notes. The first line, as your brother, okay? How often do we say that to our siblings when we start anything? And secondly, when she says, my husband, who would he say that to? And he goes to my husband, and he says, if the king knew, right? Now, a brother and sister, actually, when they're talking, if she says, my husband, the brother would not take the trouble to say the king. It is done for the sake of the audience. So in that moment, you know she is married to the king, right? But if you just look at how much is communicated about the politics of the time, the concept of the hand of the king, the kind of king that they have, this is how you can manipulate the scenario so that the characters don't sound too false, and you're still able to communicate. But even finer would be to do it with even less dialogue, even less spoon feeding. Okay, spoon feeding is your mortal enemy. You'll get away with it with your base audience very often. A lot of writers do, a lot of cinema gets away with extremely primitive, almost embarrassing spoon feeding dialogue and voiceovers. The point is whether you want your script to work, or are you happy just if the film works? Okay, sometimes the film works just fine. That does not mean your script worked. As writers in particular, okay, it is not necessary that your script be bad for a film to work. So please worry about your script working. There are a lot of people who worry about the film working. Okay, make sure that you've done good writing, not just writing that will make sure that a large number of stupid people will not miss things that you think is important information. And if you think it's important, find better ways to communicate it. I think that's pretty much as I need to say as an umbrella for what I wanted to discuss. I will request a 2-minute break, and I will be right back with you after that. In the meanwhile, please formulate your questions, keep stuff ready for me, and we will jump right into it. All right? I'll be right back.
Sure. Okay.
I would request all the attendees, if you have any questions, please post it in Q&A so that we can, proceed from there. Please make sure that your questions are to the point and not confusing. In that case, we'll have to dismiss the questions. So please make sure that your questions are clear.
Hello, am I online?
Hello.
Hi. Sorry about that little break. Yes. And so over to you for any reactions and questions.
Yeah, Rito, you can start.
So I'm going to start off with one question that what makes a dialogue popular? I mean, obviously, as a writer, you know, it's not all the time you keep on thinking about, okay, we gonna write some popular dialogues, but then in at least in our, if we just talk about very specifically to Bollywood mainstream commercial movies, the heroes or the protagonist is always given some heavy dialogues and which gets popular. So how I mean, what as a writer, what's the maybe what's the process, or what kind of ideation it goes through to at least to think of, okay, what will be the popularity of this dialogue?
To a great extent, that is done not by the dialogue itself, but by the design of the characters. Okay. To a great extent, Bollywood, if we speak for a while, and therefore I will reduce some of the pretensions to high art and superior craft that I'm referring to. I will sort of turn it down and dial it down a notch. Bollywood is really has become primarily a medium of escapism. Above all, it is, you hear concepts like giving people their money's worth, you know, people throwing coins at the stage, at the screen in a bygone era. What is that? It's basically their way of saying this is worth something to me. You're adding something to my life. Okay. What can you add to a person's life that is often characterized by struggle, often characterized by a lack of good breaks, often characterized by uh, a tough life, often not having uh, a lot of avenues of gratification, whether through expensive travel, whether through the best food. What cinema ends up doing through these larger than life characters is giving people a glimpse of a life that they otherwise would not have led. In cinema, if you link the audience emotionally to the characters, then for those 2 hours, they're able to forget their own lives. And this is why it is such a popular medium. They're able to suspend their own life and for a while become those characters. Okay? When you become those characters and those characters act in a way that fulfills a need for bravado, fulfills a need to be a great romantic, fulfills a need to put a bully in his place, fulfill a need to give back as good as you got, to undo a wrong, or to say something that makes people love you. Whenever with the character you're able to do something like that, you feel a rush of the exact same hormones that you would feel if you did that in real life. So if you're standing in front of 3 people who want to beat you up and they say something threatening to you, your natural reflex over the time has become to either keep quiet because you know you're outnumbered, or to run, or to try and diffuse the conflict. All right. In that moment, if some part of you doesn't want to take this lying down, even at the cost of being beaten up, even at the cost of harm to yourself, you end up saying something that you want to say. You end up telling the person that you will not be bullied or you're not afraid of them, even while your knees are shaking. You feel a rush of adrenaline. Okay. Now, in a cinema, sitting in that hall, if the character does it and you are truly bonded with the character, you will feel that same rush of adrenaline. Okay. So all the highs in life are related to what substance is being secreted. When you feel truly and greatly in love, okay, there is a rush of oxytocin. Through a character, can you experience that flood of oxytocin? When something happens and you do something great for someone else or you win something, there is a secretion of dopamine or dopamine. Can a character, rather than you having to do something, all you're doing is you bought the ticket and the right to experience that journey by paying for it. When you are sitting there and watching it, can the character, because you started identifying with the character, his victories are your victories, her losses are your losses. Every time that character does something that would generate something a feel good hormone, that feel-good hormone is something that is reflected within you. A dialogue that underlines the situation like that, or leads to a rush like that, a dialogue that leads to you feeling like you are a Superman. You are somebody who, in your real life, you may be a coward, but it makes you feel like somebody who's no longer afraid and is able to give it back to bullies, who's able to stand up to the oppressors, which is what explained Amitabh Bachchan's career through the 70s and 80s to such a great extent. The angry young man, what was he angry about? He was angry about the exact same thing that most of India could not afford to be angry about. And he was angry on your behalf. So every time a line communicated that anger in a truly memorable way, it is something that would stick on, because at some level, every time you wanted to revisit that, you could say that line and feel like that man yourself. Or you who accepted whichever wife or husband your parents chose for you, never had the chance to really love greatly. Perhaps you had that one great love that you never even communicated it to. And now through a character, not only do you feel a great love, but you're able to communicate it in a way that is almost poetry, which is almost a lyric. And you got to do something through that character that you never did in your life. That line becomes a memory of you doing something that you have never done. If you're not a terribly funny person, your jokes often fall flat, and then through your character, you say something that makes everyone laugh, hopefully at a bully, which is something that we did a lot of in Munna Bhai MBBS, and Rajkumar Hirani has continued doing a lot with characters subsequently in his films. You get a satisfaction that you have not gotten in your life, and you're able to enjoy it through the characters. And which is why those lines that underline moments like that, putting a bully in his place, saying something that changes the way a lot of people think. Most of us struggle to even get people to listen to a word we are saying. Most of us are not great conversationalists. We don't have these lines that make people turn their heads and suddenly change their lives. When we do it through a character, and a lot of people have a look of realization on that face, we have a reaction that we have never gotten in life and have always craved for. And so a great dialogue, again, is only comes from a creation of a great character, of the right superimposition of events, of a right moment and a right conflict in which a line is delivered that gives you something that you would not get from real life. Ideally, a rush of a particular hormone that makes you feel a certain way, either in love, either powerful, either strong, either brave, either funny. And that is something that is a memory that you would like to carry of a person you were for at least 2 hours.
So some of the students, they have few questions.
Bring them on.
So this from Krishna Dusain.
Is there any way that the students can ask their questions themselves, or is that too cumbersome?
No, it's basically they are
Too many people?
Yes, they are.
Fair enough. Fair
So
enough.
I'll just read out those questions.
No problem.
So there's one question. Basically, it's not very specific to dialogue though.
Yeah.
But then
That's okay. That's an umbrella topic I chose, but anything about script writing is fine.
yes. So from Krishna Dusain, and how convincingly, or basically is what he wants to ask is how to establish a fictional world for the audience to make them believe, something like Harry Potter or Lord of Rings. And is there any rule, or is there any what kind of difference approach a writer should bring in to convince the audience about that fictional world?
Okay, I'm just going to find out why my wife is laughing at me in the middle of this webinar, and then get back to that answer. I heard it completely.
This is like a full thing that you told me.
Okay. It's something that she has often heard from me, and that's why she's laughing. Okay. So I am not a big one for fantasy worlds and alternative universes, but almost all her cinema and all the stories that she wants to tell occurs in worlds that are not our own, because she finds our world extremely oppressive and not worth telling stories about. Okay, so the way it works, one is, I'm going to answer this question at 3 levels, although I will not take too much time on each of them. The first is your concept of the world. Again, remember that you cannot have a world where anything is and everything is possible. If anything and everything is possible, then people have nothing to latch on to, because then anything can happen at any time and people cannot outguess. It's a great part of cinema, and the joy of cinema is outguessing or trying to figure out what's going to happen next and being invested in an outcome. Okay. So I am invested in an outcome based on what I know about the world. And if the rules of the world can change at any time, if I am expecting either this will happen or that will happen based on what I know about this world, and there are totally third things happens because, hey, in this world that also happened, then I feel cheated. So when you're creating an alternative world, one of the first things you have to do is really decide what are the laws of that world. What you have to, just the way our world has certain reasonable limitations and there are laws that cannot be violated. So when I'm watching a movie, I can count on the same laws that are in my world, which is there's gravity. If a man slips from a wall, he is going to fall down. There's no way that I have to think about whether in the movie the man will do anything different. The same laws from our world have carried over into the movie, and therefore when a man is running behind a car, I have no doubt that there is a certain limit to the speed of a man based on the laws of my universe. And therefore, I know that if the car goes at its full speed, a man cannot catch it. And that is the laws of the universe, right? If you are creating an alternative world, remember that creating the laws that guide it and communicating those laws to your audience so that they can believe in this world is very important. If you do not place restrictions, then it's a free for all. And then you can, so when you create a world, you have to create its history, its geography, its science, what is the level of technology. You cannot say that it's a medieval world, but they have discovered a way to analyze the nature of the atom, right? So you have to, when you're creating a world, you have to place reasonable restrictions and create certain laws. Okay, it's very important that these laws are communicated fairly early in the film. So for example, if I'm creating a world in which there's a wonderful writer called Jonathan Stroud. I'm more of a reader than a movie watcher, frankly. So sometimes examples that I will give will be from books rather than films. There's a wonderful writer called Jonathan Stroud who writes about a world in which there are jinns and there are afrits and there are madrids and there are various kinds and levels of jinnis that people can call upon and use for help. So there's a world where there is magic and there are these artifacts that contain a certain amount of power. So there's a whole magical world that is created. Okay, it starts right away with a boy summoning a genie and giving him a task. Now, imagine if I had read half a book where there was no reference to jinns, there was no reference to other spirits, there was no reference to magic, and I think I'm reading or watching a story about a particular world, and suddenly in the middle, when a man is running for his life, and you are, as an audience, completely caught up and wondering whether he will live or die, and suddenly a genie comes and saves him, and you say, hold on, where the hell did that come from? And you say, oh, this is a world in which there are jinnis, Okay, now you've lost your audience. So one of the most important things is whatever world you create, throw people into that world early on, communicate that world to people. My advice is don't be too obsessive about trying to describe the world. Just the way audience has to find out what is going on in the lives of characters through through dialogue that they would actually say and through behavior that would actually make sense. You have to create those same situations so that through the lives of characters you understand what is going on. Take Harry Potter, one of the possibly the best known, easily the best known examples of a magical world. Okay, it starts off in a street where you have two people discussing the death of someone, but it starts right in the first chapter with a cat turning into a woman and them discussing that there is a magical wizard who's gone bad and he has killed certain people. That one act of the cat turning into Mrs. McGonagall or whatever her name is, right? It quickly brings you into this world and you say, this is a world in which people can change shapes. There are witches, there are wizards. So very early on that world is. Now the audience, remember, is not trying to outguess the world. If you create the world, throw them into it early, communicate it well through the kind of characters that you have created. Again, all the same rules come back. This right superimposition of drama, the right creation of characters, just throw them into a situation where the world will need to communicate itself rather than having to communicate the world separately. There's nothing more sad than saying this is a world in which this happens, this doesn't happen, it is based in this time, it is in an alternative universe, these are the rules of the world. There's nothing more sad. You have to discover it through the actions of the characters and the way you superimpose dramatic situations. Okay, so the best way to do it, to create those worlds, is to be sure that you see as much of it as possible in terms of its laws, in terms of its concepts, what is possible spiritually, magically, scientifically, where this world occurs, know it as well as possible. And in terms of communicating it to the audience, try and do it early and try and do it by what the characters are doing rather than, again, feeding information in a false way. The moment you do that through characters that seem true, the audience will say, if the characters seem true, this kind of a world must exist. If the characters seem false, your world will also seem false. So you, again, even to create those worlds, you have to dip into that same, what I keep calling the fountain of universal consciousness. Each one of us knows how people behave in certain situations. So if I know how a boy in a slum would behave when his parents died, that same knowledge will allow me to imagine how a boy of 10 who's actually a wizard will feel when his parents die. Okay, if you create the emotional context correctly and communicate it well as a writer, then the audience will come along with you for the ride, and nothing can sometimes be more fulfilling than going to an alternative world. Because like I said, a great part of the gratification of cinema is living lives that we have not lived. Great cinema, or very often let us say that cinema that is trying to be more artistic, tends to show you a reflection of real lives. Escapist cinema, particularly Hollywood and Bollywood, tries to take you through journeys that you would otherwise not live in life. You can be braver, you can be a spy, you can be an action hero, you can be a great romantic, you can be a con man who cons a very evil corporation out of millions of dollars, you can take revenge for your friend, which you can't do in life. Now imagine the fulfillment that can come from actually making them live through another world, another universe that they would not have lived through. So imagine, that is why the enduring appeal of Lord of the Rings, of your Harry Potter series, because now you're also letting them live things that no human being has lived, through magic and through a whole different kind of universe and a different kind of laws. And so if you do it well, that kind of cinema can also be extremely gratifying.
Thank you. So we'll go to the new question. So basically, there one is basically, I guess it's ma'am has already asked one question. So what is the best way to start a film? And along with that, I would also.
Sorry, I did not catch that. Please, can you repeat that?
What's the best way to start a film?
Okay.
So basically, what's the best way to start writing a film? So that's what I guess ma'am has asked this. Paki ma'am.
There are two different questions. I don't know which one ma'am is asking, but I'll try and answer both quickly. What is the best way to start a film? One is the actual process of actually the watching of a film. So what is the best way to open a movie? And the other is how to start a film is how to start writing a film. Okay. How to open a movie is entirely up to you, but the intention is very clear. Within the first few minutes, you have to get the audience's attention by some kind of an emotional shock. Now, don't take a shock here literally, but emotionally jostling them. When people come in, they come in a state of equilibrium. They come into the theater, when they settle down, they are in a state of nothingness. They're surrendering to you. Their lives have been a particular way, and they bring that continuation of their lives. And when they sit down, they are themselves. The first thing you need to do is disrupt that graph of their lives, which is something that jostles them out of the equanimity of their lives and triggers a new response to something else. So that first thing you do is break the continuity of their lives. And so a disruption, something that causes some kind of a disturbance that breaks them out of that graph and prepares them from going on another journey, is of the essence. So very early on, doing that and very quickly following it up with a way of emotionally linking the character, the audience, to a character's journey. Okay, these are extremely important, but which is why you will see a lot of movies starting with a death, because nothing jostles people out of their comfort zone like death. So there's a reason why so many movies start with somebody being killed. Okay, but that is not that is what they say a motiba. That's the most gross way of doing it. Okay, there are often very subtle ways of doing it also. So to me, one of the most important things early on is to show. Now, from what you're talking about, let's take Matrix as an example. Okay, how does it start? It seems to just be that a criminal has been contained in a particular building. Some people who seem to be like the FBI have come there and said, "Where is she?" And they say she's upstairs. Two agents have gone in. So far, it seems to be a and this is within the first minute or so. Okay. And they say two people have gone in, and he said, "I specifically told you not to engage with her." He goes, "Don't worry, my men are extremely qualified." He goes, "I'm sorry, your men are dead already." Now, what you've done is you said a line that has jostled you out of your comfort zone of what you know about our world. If there's one person inside and extremely qualified agents have gone in, why are they dead already? So you've already created a question that have got people say, wait, what? How can one person do that? Now you see the person, and this is just a woman in an outfit that does not typically seem like something that we wear in our real lives. That is a further disturbance. And when they approach and suddenly she gets up and you think it's going to go into an action sequence, but she does something that completely violates the laws of nature as we know it. She seems suspended in the air and fights in a way that you know that no human being can fight. This is another disruption. It shows you that the laws of science as you know it are not working in this universe, and therefore it creates a question: who is she? What is this world? How is she able to do this? What it has done is got you asking questions. Above all, what an opening of a film needs to do is get the audience asking questions. As long as they're not asking questions, and that's again why I hate voiceover so much. A voiceover starts giving you answers before you have even got the audience to ask any question. So what the hell are you answering? Why are you telling them something that you have not got them to care about? All right. So the best openings are the ones that immediately get the audience asking questions about what is going on, about the character, because questions mean that they are invested in the answers. And the more questions you get them to ask and the more questions you answer in a satisfying way, you will have your viewer satisfied and happy and invested in your story. In terms of the process of writing a movie, how do you start? After all these years, I cannot tell you how to start. I cannot tell you what the journey is. It is difficult and different each time. Sometimes you might start with just the concept of a world. Sometimes you might start with just the concept of a character. Sometimes you might just start with knowing something about a great love. Each one has a different trigger. But what I do advise more and more people is don't be in a hurry to start writing screenplay. Don't be in a hurry to start putting it down on paper as a script. Look up the concept of a supersaturated solution after this talk is over. A supersaturated solution is any solvent in which you have put so much. So take sugar, for example. Okay, when you keep mixing sugar to water, there's a certain amount of sugar it can hold, after which it will not dissolve any more sugar. But if you heat it up, okay, and there are no impurities, you can actually end up putting in more sugar, what we call chashni, which is actually more sugar than the water is actually supposed to hold. And it is called a supersaturated solution, which means it is now contains more sugar than the water can actually hold. If in this supersaturated solution you put one crystal, what is called a seed crystal, an entire large crystal of sugar will be deposited around it. Okay, so that's so my advice to writers is, before you start writing, once you know something about the character and the world and stuff like that, the more you super saturate this solution, the more information you put in. You may not need all of it, okay, but the more you know about it without even realizing certain things are being prepared and your entire solution is being ready, and then when you come up with a great idea for a character or a moment or a great end, and then you will say, I'm just putting down information, where's the story, where's the story, where's the story. But once that solution is prepared and you put in the seed crystal, you will realize that you actually knew much more of the story, and that whole crystal of the story forms without you even realizing that you had been making connections in your head, creating characters, creating moments, and it will happen magically. But that will happen only if you truly know your world, truly know your characters, truly know, just have thought so much about moments and situations and characters and the conflicts that you're going to create. The more you know about it, the more, when you actually start writing, is when it will fall into place. The other thing that I advise people, something very horrifying that I saw all through my years as a writer, is that when people would say that they've shot the entire movie, and they have to shoot the climax, and now they are writing the climax. To me, that is an absolutely bizarre concept. You traveled a whole journey without knowing where you were going. So the idea of writing a story or making a film without knowing the end, if your end can be open-ended, that means your entire journey wasn't designed. And script writing is above all about design, okay? Especially commercial filmmaking, right? You can make exploratory cinema, that's a whole different monster. But the idea that somebody has shot a film, and this I encountered very early on, it was some film with Ajay Devgan and Salman Khan or something like that, where they actually didn't know the end. They had two different options for ends, and they had shot the rest of the movie. So to me, when most important, the definition of a screenplay, at least one of the definitions, is very early on, ask one important question that you can get the audience to care about. Will he take revenge for his father's death? Will these two get together in spite of the family's enmity? Will he be able to prove that his friend was innocent? Whatever is your question, ask a good question from a character that you got the audience to care about by emotionally involving them in his or her journey, and then spend the rest of the film answering that question in the most interesting way you can.
So as we have a very limited time now, so we'll just quickly take a few questions.
Sure.
So there is one question from a student, Neeraj Shinde. So he wants to know that what are the precautions or preparation should one do while writing dialogues for round characters?
For
round characters, while writing dialogues for round characters.
What is round characters?
I guess which has got quite ups and low for the characters which has got more ups and lows.
I'm not sure I understand the question, and I don't want to bluff my way through it. So can we move on to the next question while whoever sent that one can qualify it a little better? I don't understand what's a round character.
One question is basically, should we write a story considering a character, or should we consider a character then write a story?
That is completely open-ended. Sometimes a character, you can get fixated on a character, just find the idea of a particular character really exciting, and then you say, okay, so if I want to tell a story about this character, what is the journey that I take her on or him on that makes it exciting? And sometimes you find a particular world exciting, and you say, okay, what are the kind of characters I can put in this world to tell an interesting story? Sometimes you might find a particular plot point exciting. You might just say, oh, I would love to tell a story about a particular solution for a murder, and then you put the world and the character, say what is the most satisfying way to use this idea. So every journey begins with the first step, and nobody can tell a writer what the first step should be. Okay, you can become obsessed with or taken up by any image. It could be the image of a person, it could be the image of a moment, it could be the image of a situation, it could be the image of a world. You might want to tell a story about your student. A lot of great cinemas happen because people wanted to tell a story about their student days, for example, and then look for the characters to fill that world. So the first step is absolutely open to every writer, what it is that first grabs them to tell a story that is individual and peculiar to every writer.
So we'll move to.
Okay, there are some questions. Oh, there's a panel here that I can
Yes,
see.
there's a Q&A section. You can actually see the question.
When the scene is about conversation, and the whole idea of the scene is to convey conflicts between the characters on a particular subject. Say the correct way to protest. How should it be done in a way that eliminates the preachy tones or monologues? Just read it after you have written it and see whether it sounds like people talking or does it sound like preachy tones or monologues. If you have written it and you know how people talk, when you read it back to yourself, you have to be able to gauge, and that is your job as a writer. You have to be able to gauge whether it sounds true, whether it sounds real, or whether it sounds like it's only there because the writer wanted it to be there. There's nothing worse than a situation going a particular way that doesn't seem real. It seems like a writer decided this should happen. There's no other reason this should happen. So, in fact, your question contains your answer. You have to eliminate the preachy tones and monologues. Find a way to do it. There's no simple answer here. It is just a question of hacking away at it until you are satisfied that yes, it sounds interesting, involving, and it sounds like that character talking. If it sounds like that character talking and you've got the audience to care about that character, then it will work. And very often a monologue is one of the high points of a film. But that depends on how you've designed the characters. The dialogue has to flow from the way you've designed the characters, not the other way around. Okay. There's another question here. How can we improve the writing and add dialogue? I think I only write the story. I can't add a conversation. Well, that is why we've gone and developed the concept of dialogue writers. A lot of people who love cinema have had their entire education either in English and speak, their mother tongue at home, which might not be Hindi, and now they have to speak a language that speaks to a whole country, but actually nobody really talks, and which is why you turn to experts like me. And that's why we have a career. Sadly, you will have to live with what we do unless you raise your abilities as a writer more and more. Otherwise, you will always be at the mercy of a dialogue writer, and I assure you, most of us are not very good. Why aren't dialogues memorable these days? Cinema in the yesteryears was always defined by great sounding dialogues, especially the stars were known for great dialogue delivery. Why isn't it happening often these days? I'll tell you why it isn't happening often these days. It's not happening because lives have become smaller. Okay? Great cinema comes from great conflict. Great conflict will come when the protagonist is fighting a great force that is trying to stop him or her from doing something. All right. So in the cinema that you're referring to, when there was great dialogue, what did a person have to stand up to? A poor person stood up to a rich person because a rich person was by definition evil, the capitalist, the businessman who was against the laborers and stuff like that. So in that kind of a great conflict, when a man was showing great braveness and great courage, you got great dialogue. Similarly, in love stories, you had everyone from the gaon to the family to the community to your from the Ramayana time, even the Dhobi. Okay, everyone had a say in your relationship, and therefore, when you were fighting for your love, you were fighting very great forces. You were fighting the village priest who pretty much decided how everything in the village would be. You were fighting the king. You were fighting the rich versus poor divide. And you were fighting parental disapproval. You were fighting enmity. You were fighting all sorts of things. So when the conflict is great, and therefore people's lives seem to be larger, and therefore great dialogue is possible. Today, what has happened is that less and less society, family, community are involved in the lives of individuals. Okay, if two people decide they want to be together, uh, it is becoming more and more unusual, more and more rare for anyone else to have a say in the matter. Okay, the idea that a family can say no to a modern couple is receding further and further into history. And when there is no conflict in the lives of individuals, and where it comes to money, for example, um, where money was the enemy, today, if you're not trying to make money, if you're not trying to be rich, if you're not part of the capitalist bandwagon, you're considered to be a bit silly or a leftist, or all those wonderful words that we throw around. So where is the great villain? Where is the great villain that we have not already joined? What is the villain of our times? Speaking very personally, I think the great villain of our times is communalism. Okay, religions turning on each other, trying to say that a particular religion is bad, or trying to stereotype anyone from a particular religion. The problem is that uh, many of us have become part of that problem. We are no longer on the other side of the divide. So there was capitalism, and we, as the protagonists of movies, used to be on the other side of the divide. There was communalism. There were the evil politicians in the 80s जो हिंदू और मुसलमान को एक दूसरे से लड़ा रहे थे, and we were the heroes who were fighting them, trying to remind people that there should be unity. Today we have become part of the problem, where we have a problem with each other. We have subscribed to the notion that people are different and not to be trusted. We have subscribed to the notion that we should try and make money. The more money we make, we are more successful. We have crossed that divide, and we have institutionalized the same thing that was the villain in previous years. Today we have said that no, that is the hero. The rich guy is the hero. We have actually joined with what used to be the antagonist. Now, when you don't have a great villain to fight, your stories are not taking on a great conflict, and as a result, you're not going to have great dialogue that is a reflection of how great your journey or your fight was. We are living smaller lives. It's becoming increasingly difficult to come up with larger than life stories because we have become smaller people. Our conflicts have become smaller. What we are fighting against has become smaller. In fact, most of us don't want to fight. We want to avoid the problem and get on with our lives. There's nothing for the angry young man to be angry about. How are you going to get great angry dialogue? So I think that is why we are struggling for memorable dialogue. How to create tension effectively between characters just through conversations? Well, don't create it just through conversation. There's a reason why so many other tools of the craft are available to you. You've been given a camera, not just a microphone. So why do you want to create it just through conversation? The question itself, I think, has a certain defeatism and weakness in it. Okay, don't try and create it just through dialogue. Dialogue is the last resort of the bad writer. You can write good dialogue, you can be a good dialogue writer, but dialogue is very low on the list of priorities in cinema. Okay, the less you rely on dialogue, the finer your cinema is going to be. Please make your peace with that. Okay, sorry, should I keep going from here, or do you want to choose questions? How do you want to do this, guys? I know we are running out of time, so you should decide how this is conducted.
Choose your questions.
Ritu sir, let's just take last two questions.
Okay, there's one that I do want to answer.
Okay.
There's one that I do want to answer. It's by Devdutt More. He says, do you engage in cinematography while being a writer? I will qualify that question a little bit. I do not engage in cinematography. Cinematography is a department. Cinematography is a craft. Okay? But above all, as a screenwriter, what are you doing? You are trying to guide the viewer's eye. You are trying to say, what is it that I see on the camera that helps me tell my story? Okay? The moment you are using the medium of what is on screen, you are necessarily using cinematography. So if you decide that at this point, I want to show the close-up of, let's go back to my first example. I want to show the man clutching a knife so tightly that his hand is bleeding. So if from a close-up of his face where he's smiling, if I go to a shot where his hand seems to be bleeding, I'm already defining what a shot needs to be. The moment I define what a shot needs to be, I am necessarily in the department of cinematography. The point is not whether or not I engage in cinematography. The point is the job of cinematography in cinema is to completely justify and maximize what the story is, what the script is. Remember, uh, there's the best definition of a director that I have encountered in all these years is it is the person who ensures the continuity of the story. The director's job is to make sure that the script is doing the same thing as the action, as the design, that the characters are styled in the same way that the story requires them to be. The shots are telling the same story in the best way possible. The director is the person who has to take that script and say, every single department now has to work towards this. And I am the person who will make sure that each one of them is taking the story forward rather than working against it. So if the story is about a rich man and the person is styled in a way that doesn't look rich, or is sitting in a car that does not seem to suggest that he is rich, or she is rich, then the director is the person who has to come up and say, no, this is violating the story. The person needs to be in a better car. The person needs to be styled better. The person would not use this dialect because that is not the way rich people speak. So ensuring character continuity and story continuity is the job of the director. Similarly, if I am writing a scene where I say that I'm walking and I sense somebody in the dark and I look there, but all I see is the shadows. There's nobody else in the dark. I'm necessarily saying that the camera needs to now shoot a blind alley where all I can see is darkness. So there's no way that every single frame that you are describing or every scene you are describing does not have at least a suggestion or at least an insight or at least a clear instruction on what needs to be on camera. How well it is done and what are the technical tools with which that is enhanced is the department, and whether it can also be done better. That is the department of cinematography. But above all, a screenplay writer, a script writer is telling you what needs to be on camera and what needs to be on the audio track. Those are your devices. There's no way you can cut off writing from that. Yeah, so.
Yeah. I think we can take the last question, one more question. With OTTs giving,
a good one.
Yeah, with OTTs giving a bigger canvases, has writing changed, and how
OTT
it has been
giving
changed?
bigger canvases and have writing changed. I think that is extremely true, and it's an extremely exciting time because what has happened is that OTT is free from the notions of censorship. Secondly, it is free from, because it is individual private consumption and not social consumption. So television is often consumed with the family socially. Cinema is often consumed with a bunch of people with different sensibilities, each one of whom can be individually offended by something. With the idea, so OTTs are an extension of the idea of private consumption. OTTs have simply turned it into a larger economic form, but it started with YouTube and your personal videos. So where there's personal consumption and the people have the right to view or not view something, it obviously frees up a writer from a lot of considerations of whether somebody will be offended by something, whether somebody will be bothered by something, whether it will cause a problem, whether enough people will like it. What it does is allows people to choose and without worrying about the way it plays out socially, right? So I think it's freed storytelling from a lot of rules that were making it benign, that were dumbing it down, and the option exists of doing a lot more exciting storytelling. The problem is that very often the people who are in charge of this new medium have not necessarily developed a new expertise. A lot of them are previous TV executives or from other production houses. So for them also, it is a journey of learning. For them to break away the thinking that years of designing shows for television has given. Like for the longest time, everyone believed that everything on an OTT platform needed to be sexual or shocking, right? And all your early shows had a sexual or shocking component that was meant to either horrify you or really bother you. And you realize that, in fact, just a show about a couple and their daily conversations, struggles, and little things that they were troubled by was more popular than shows about sort of horror and sex and all that. So there is a process of learning. Initially, you just feel that, oh, because it can be sexual and shocking, let's do that. But then you realize that no, that doesn't necessarily make a great story. So the landscape that has opened up before writers is an endless and gorgeous one, but it is still limited by the limitations of the writers themselves, and very often the lack of brightness of those who have to decide whether or not something goes on. But as we learn more, and as through trial and error, and hopefully more and more visionary people will come in, but it is by far the most exciting development for screenwriters in recent memory.
Okay, that was a good answer. So I think we almost done with the time. So we can wind it up.
Excellent. Thank you.
There are some questions we couldn't answer, but due to time. But yeah, I mean, I hope student got clear a very good idea about.
Yes, I would like to leave all of you with that is. If I answer live, would that answer go to everyone? Is that how?
Yes.
it works?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, that's
okay. So I'm going to type out an answer to Filmy Akash's question, how to attract audience. No, actually, I will type it on Atul Kasare's question. Can you explain the process of screenwriting? There is an article, a blog on screenwriting that was written by a gentleman whose name my fingers remember better than my mind. I will know when I'm typing it. I'm going to try and put the name of that blog on the answer. Please find it. It will answer so many questions for you. And it is one of those documents that from now till you stop screenwriting should always be handy to you, and periodically you should visit it because it's got some of the best rules of scriptwriting that I've ever encountered. Okay, so I'm going to type the answer. Or you would like to answer? I can't type the answer.
So
yeah, you can. You can click on type that.
Type answer.
Okay. Except that for some reason it's.
No.
Okay. Anyway, let me.
You can actually type it in the chat also, possible.
In the chat. Okay.
All the students. Yeah, all the students.
All panelists. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So please find this article. This is the name of the blog. Not the blog, it's one particular column. And it is written by a gentleman called Terry Rossio. Okay. So just look for this online. It should be available. And if I share it with panelists only, please forward it to all. I can do it to all panelists.
Yeah, I forwarded it.
Oh, you have. Excellent. Okay, great. Sorry, I'm not very technically qualified, like I said. But yeah, almost any question that I have not answered, chances are you will find an excellent answer in that article. And I think it's probably the best gift I can give to all of you today.
Okay, thank you. That was a great session.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Abbas, for joining us. Cool. Thank you, everyone.
Happy writing, all of you.
Thank you.
Use this time. It'll keep you sane.
Thank you.
All the best. Stay safe.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.